Hey, everybody, this is Ashton Forbes. Welcome to another Hard Truths podcast. My guest today is Wyatt Meldman-Floch. He is a former SETI researcher and now is the CEO of Reality, a blockchain company. He also has personal connection to Tri-Alpha Energy, the fusion company that we've been researching for a long time. Looking forward to this conversation. Wyatt, thank you for joining me today. How are you doing, brother?
Hi, doing great. Great to be here. Thanks.
Well, let's just start right off with the SETI connection.
hmm
So, you were an intern or you worked at SETI once upon a time. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah, yep.
And what did you learn? Because I think that a lot of people out there have different perspectives and views on SETI. I mean, the idea, if you're not familiar with SETI, is that they were looking for, either techno signatures or messages from other civilizations out there in the universe. And I think it was the WoW signal in the 70s or the 90s, whenever that
I think
was.
so. Yeah,
The WoW.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the specific date, but that was like probably one of the first, big kind of things that they picked up. And yeah, I mean, SETI also like, obviously like there is that component to like looking for aliens and stuff. And like, my project was one of those projects. I also did like another one, kind of a more boring one where I was just sort of like doing some data engineering for the Kepler spacecraft. But they're also like an astrobiology institute. So they're really just trying to understand like how does life actually emerge in different environments, like out in space.
What is your thoughts on that? Well, how do you think? Do you think why have we not had success since the WoW signal? And does it have to do with how life evolves elsewhere? Because it doesn't necessarily have to evolve like it does here. So I think that one criticism that people would have of SETI is you'd say, well, we're assuming that aliens are like us. We're looking for signals that we put out there. It's kind of like saying, well, if we're looking for Native Americans, we should look for smoke signals or whatever, assuming that the Native Americans would be using electromagnetism when they're using smoke signals, stuff like that. Like, is that a possibility for why we haven't seen aliens? And has SETI ever considered that? What do you think from the behind closed doors?
But yeah, I mean, I guarantee you, I mean, they have considered this, and it's like a big thing we've like talked about. So, I mean, so the first thing that everybody was looking for was like radio,
Mm-hmm.
signals, and like obviously, like they're not going to be sending out like sports broadcast or whatever, like how our stuff's sort of emanating from our solar system. But it was a good first place to start, and I know that yeah, they're definitely trying to expand to newer things. The thing that I made actually was kind of interesting because it uses pure information theory that you can apply to any kind of, I don't know, type of information, whether it's like radio or just, some kind of like spectral signal or whatnot. And specifically used the work that John C. Lilly did to, model animal communication, which is a pretty wild story with the whole, the dolphins and the whole thing. I think there was a drunk history about it. It's pretty funny. And I think I forget who did it, but it's great. But no, what's really cool is that in just the universe in general, and especially in information theory, there's these certain patterns that sort of emerge. And specifically in like dynamical systems, and we have this thing called chaos theory, where certain kind of like highly improbable states of your system are possible, which sort of like break through what we think is possible in like an ordinary dynamical system. I don't know. I hope that sort of made sense, but like in
Well,
regular information theory, there's like certain patterns of like entropy that show up, and when things start to deviate from the distribution of like ordinary entropy, then you know that you have some type of like a signal. And so basically, I was looking at something called like engrams. So essentially, like if you take a wave, you can basically break up the wave into a collection of certain patterns. And as those patterns start to show like a not random, sort of like distribution, then you know that there's some type of information encoding inside of there. And as an example, like if you look at like, like squirrels or like, something that we would consider a more like primitive form of life, they have a more like, kind of like random distribution of the signals that they, show in their actual communication. Then when you get to humans and specifically like dolphins and whales, they have a much higher kind of like informational complexity in their language. Like whales, I believe, are actually the most complex communication on Earth. So basically, with the thing that I made, which I guess this is like right when I left that they were going to put it on the Allen Telescope Array. They would basically pipe the actual like data from those satellites through this model, and I built a binary classifier. So what that means is that like as data is coming in, like a stream, it takes a look at certain like chunks basically of the data stream. And if a chunk seems to have some type of informational complexity that's like a lot higher than a baseline, it'll sort of like make a sick, like it'll flag it as something. So yeah.
So to explain that for the viewers who may not understand what we're talking about here, essentially we're looking for patterns. So you're saying
Yeah.
that we don't even need to know what language they're speaking because we can just sample the data, the information, the noise, and we can determine if it's truly random or if there's some structure to it. And if there's structure to it, then means someone is possibly sending us a message. So what you're saying here is that if we just map like the thermal spectrum, if we're seeing something that looks abnormal, then maybe that's a message. We might not know what it says, but just like with the Native Americans, we can tell there's a smoke signal that's being shot in the sky. We don't know what it means, but it means something, right?
Yeah.
And this reminds me of one of my earliest criticisms. That I'm a big critic of SETI because I haven't seen any results, and I think that we're not looking the right way. I don't remember what TV show it was, but I want to say like early 2000s, and somebody was pointing out essentially what you just mentioned. They said, we're taking all this data and information, but we don't know what we're looking for. So maybe we just have to look at that data in a different way, and we'll find that there's a secret message there the whole time. And I kept thinking about that because I think that as humans, we always have this tendency to assume the aliens are going to be just like us. But in reality, they may be completely different. They may use different technologies, etc. So I always thought that was a compelling answer to the Fermi paradox. Why don't we see the aliens everywhere? Well, we are. They are out there. We're just the primitive ones, not on their level. We're not using their technology or ways we can communicate with them. And our technologies are just too slow. Like people will say, like, oh, like the first radio or the first television broadcast still like hasn't even gone. It's only like 100 light years away or something. It's barely gotten anywhere. So even by our technology, there's just no way we could communicate. So let
Yeah.
me ask this. Actually, I have two different questions. I think I want to
Yeah.
start with another thought that I've had that I haven't really heard other people say is that what if there's another answer? What if that's wrong? What if it turns out that there's something like most aliens that evolve don't evolve on the outside of their planet? This is something I think a lot of people discount.
Yeah.
Like we're on the outside of our planet. The outer space is right up there, and there's nothing between us and outer space except for the air. And we're not underwater. We're not under a layer of rock. What if most civilizations start like evolve underwater? What if they evolve inside the planet, inside the crust, and they don't even know that there's a universe out there? What about something like that? Have you ever considered that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if I had to guess, I think yeah, I mean, look, the reality of the situation here is that the probability of having like a surface on your planet that's like habitable or like hospitable for like our type of life is really low. But having like, heat jets inside of like an ocean that certain types of bacteria at least can like get their energy from like the thermal heat is at least conceptually, I think it'd be a lot more like it happen more often, especially considering just how, a lot of, actual planets and whatnot don't have super strong atmospheres and they're getting pelted by rocks all the time. I would assume that's like highly, much more probable. So yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of people too at SETI would totally agree. Everybody there, I will also just say, and this is kind of like my own personal experience, it's starting to become more common, especially since the Epstein stuff, is that like there's certain, people who are controlling access to funding inside of science and sort of labeling like really great kind of cool ideas as like pseudoscience or like quackery and whatnot. Like I was gonna get a PhD in like quantum engineering and quantum information theory. And obviously, like I had other reasons. Like I ended up just getting a job working in tech. I bought a half a master's degree and did a bunch of research. But like people, like my professors would tell me, like what you want to work on, like is sick. And I think everybody here totally wants to do it. Like I wanted to make wormholes out of synthetic quantum fields, because essentially, like when you entangle quantum states, they create a space-time geometry, which like you could theoretically turn into something like a Klein-Gordon bottle. And Yeah, I mean, you could have that thing kind of like spit out, like the metaphor inside of that movie Alien or whatnot, and right in the beginning where they like pierce a piece of paper. Like you could theoretically like, do some experiments to try and figure that out. But like if you try to go get funding for that, like nobody's gonna fund it because they're just like, oh, this dude's a quack or something. And it's like, no, it's actually just like cool. And I think people are really just, passionate and inspired by this. And
Hmm.
there's like this weird, same thing. Who's the guy, Eric or Brett? I think it's Eric Weinstein who's been talking about that too. Like, why aren't people looking at quantum gravity? Yeah, why the fuck isn't anyone looking at anything but string theory? It's like it doesn't make any sense. I mean, the real talk is that string theory really helps us solve problems in differential geometry, which is like the mathematics that like bases all of like physics and engineering and stuff. But like it's pretty clearly obvious that that's been like manipulated. And I think it was like Giorgiani or something. I don't know, it was on your show or somebody else was talking about how like Ghislaine Maxwell's dad owned like Springerlink or whatnot and kind of had like final say on who got published and whatnot. And I mean, these coincidences, like when they start to pile up, you're just like, no, man, there's too many coincidences for it to not be something. So I think a lot of people at SETI and NASA especially have a lot of really cool ideas that like, they kind of have to keep their shit mainstream to maintain funding and sort of like maintain like just like respect of the wider scientific, world, which is both a shame, but also like at least I can say from SETI, they're doing a lot of really great stuff with astrobiology. So they're great people, and it was like my first real job, and they hired me when I was a teenager. So thank you.
So, do you think that there's a lot other people or a lot of people at SETI that have that same view that like we could be doing more, but we have to be careful about what we push because it would be considered pseudoscience and we have to keep it all mainstream?
I can say with 100% like guarantee that not just at SETI, but just at NASA in general, and like everybody in like the particle physics world and the quantum world that I did like my, actual coursework in would completely agree that like you have to basically toe the line of what's acceptable in order to get your like lab funded, which just like kind of sucks. So it's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah, and I'm not even going to push back because I mean that's what I've seen every
True.
single engineer that I've researched and watched and learned from, they all say the same thing.
Yeah.
They go so far as to say like you have to be careful how you word stuff in your patents because the patent office will immediately just reject anything they consider to be against the laws of thermodynamics, which is just wild to me that we live in a world where that much control exists, especially over something that I don't even think is controversial anymore, maybe 20 years ago, but quantum entanglement, quantum technologies. I mean, I just reviewed a quantum radar that China has now mass produced that is an EPR device. And I'm just sitting here wondering like how people are just ignoring that China's rolling out quantum radars.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, like you said, if you were to probably propose some type of search based on quantum technologies, they would, people would say, oh, well, that's pseudoscience. That's nonsense. I mean, maybe not today, but 10 years ago,
Yeah.
possibly.
No, 100%. I sent you that paper too. That guy in Japan who made like well, both theoretically and now it's been like proven with like a simulated or like a quantum simulated annealing, programming language that this guy basically made like a gauge field or like he made a way to couple like the Casimir effect, like background radiation with like a quantum computer, which would essentially make like a free energy device. And it's gone from both like mathematics to like actual like at least using like one of these like simulated quantum languages, and it's like it's worked out. So like I hope this guy gets funding because like it's only becoming more and more probable that like that could fucking work, and it's just like why not? I mean, like what's more important than that? So yeah, I hope he gets lucky.
Well, so if the government, like if this quantum technologies work and there is a whole nother method of searching, wouldn't that imply that like the government already had it? Probably the military already had it. Like this is what scares me about this is that you say, okay, well, we failed at searching. Maybe we're fundamentally looking in the wrong way. There should be life everywhere if there's life here. But then the problem comes up. Well, if the government has these quantum, I mean, China's already rolling out quantum radar. It means we definitely have it. Then we probably should be able to see those civilizations, which brings me back to the UFO topic. And then people may ask, well, Ashton's just using buzzwords. So let me be very specific. I'm talking about high frequency gravitational wave detectors, which we could use as telescopes. It can be used as communication methods as well. Have you ever heard, has that ever been brought up, high frequency gravitational wave detectors? And what do
Yeah,
you think about the idea of like, well, the military
yeah.
is 20 years advanced. Don't they have this? Go ahead.
Yeah, the gravitational wave stuff is really cool, and that came out right around there was some like Bose-Einstein condensate shit, like maybe like 15 years ago or something. That was kind of like when I was still doing physics, but yeah. So I mean, like the gravitational wave detectors that are out there, they seem to work. There's also a lot of stuff sort of related to that with neutrinos.
Mhm.
I mean, look, here's the real talk is like it's just really clear that like, you know, the mainstream science world and like what's going on in like the deep black government are like two different things. And you know, I did some like military contracting and stuff, and I can also say that just like in general, even the like mainstream Department of Defense stuff is it's not really super complex. So there really has to be something that's like, you know, akin to what I would say like a breakaway civilization or whatnot. And it's honestly like some people I worked with in the science world have like also expressed this as well. And just sort of the fact that like a lot of people as well who are trying to like bridge from the ordinary science world are sort of going into like the military intelligence world to get funding because of a lot of the different like not even necessarily UFOs, but like just random like orbs and drones and stuff that they're seeing, especially over like Europe and whatnot. And people are pretty spooked and they don't really like know where they're coming from. But like it's very clearly obvious that there's like some type of um just something going on. And like, you know, a lot of people too, just some people like I can say without naming any names or anything, just connected to that whole kind of like NASA SETI world, they really think that you know, there is like a lot of these UFOs and these things that we're seeing are just like humans and whatnot. And yeah, a lot of stuff kind of gets covered up and it's fishy, and you can't say anything, but like people sort of witness it firsthand.
Hmm. So why do you say that there must be a breakaway? So is it just because that assumption that what we're seeing must be human, or is it that like I guess the reason why I'm asking is that when I talk to like smart, connected, wealthy people, you know, the thing I always hear back from them is there's no way the government could be hiding these secrets. It's too inefficient. The government is. If you've seen, they always tell me if you've seen the government, you know there's no way they could do this. Which, by the way, guys, I'm a government contractor myself. I've worked with the government a lot. I know the inefficiencies of the government, but my opinion is that doesn't mean they couldn't pull it off. I guess what I'm kind of leading the question here, but my opinion is that there is an elite group of very smart people that know how to compartmentalize information. They know how to use the defense contractors to keep that information sequestered from FOIA, et cetera. And then that to me would be the breakaway civilization, that those people that are all really smart, they don't see that because it's all underneath the surface. Is that kind of what you're talking about, or do you have a different perspective?
Yeah. No, no, 100%. And also like I'm just sort of like talking like water cooler talk with like people I used to work with, just sort of sharing their personal anecdotes. And you know, so I'll also mention another one too. So when I was like working at SETI, I had a really great buddy who was like also an intern at like Lockheed or whatnot. And you know, they, you know, when you sort of get in the system, because he was like getting a master's or PhD or something, he was gonna like go work for them. They basically like put you in a room with like a light on your face, and they're just like, if you leak anything, like we're just gonna, you know, disappear you or whatnot. And at least that's what he told me happened when he got in. I don't know. But the real talk here, too, you mentioned, is that like these private organizations are like immune to FOIA requests. So there's like
Mhm.
no way that anybody can even figure like without what's going on. But I mean, you should all like it's really just worth mentioning too that like the intelligence agencies are also like whether in cahoots is not even strong enough. Like they're basically like, you know, organized crime syndicates. Like, you know, whether it's managing the cartels or just like the way in which the underground of the world works. These organizations like are so immune to everything. Like they can off presidents. Like everybody knows it at this point. Like what we think is like the government isn't even really the government. Like, and it all sort of really boils down to World War II. And that stuff's really been coming out lately, which I think is awesome. I've really been kind of like deep in it myself. But yeah, whether it's like NORAD or just like the CIA and stuff, like these individuals live in a different world outside of like our reality. And their entire job is literally manipulating our reality in order to make sure that we don't become aware of it. Um, and that's just the honest to God truth. So, you
Let
know,
me add on to that
yeah.
because today, this morning, while we were asleep, the United States of America did a special forces operation in the capital of Venezuela and literally kidnapped the president Maduro of Venezuela and his wife and has extradited them to the United States. Presumably, they've got the blindfolds on, the ear things, and they can't hear anything. And I think if you would have asked people a week ago if they thought that was possible, that could happen, 99% of people said, no way. No way. Are you kidding me? That kidnap a president of a foreign country? No way. And we just did it in like 3 hours in the middle of the night with Chinooks or Blackhawks or whatever shooting missiles down on the capital city. So people do not give our intelligence and military industrial complex enough credit. By the way, it didn't take any magical orbs to pull it off either. They just did it with
No.
conventional weaponry.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's like literally like the tip of the iceberg. Like, what
Yeah.
is that extraordinary rendition from the 90s? Like, dude, we've been overthrowing governments forever. Like, that's the whole shtick. I'm not even like talking about that. I just mean like literally like ever since like the world was rebuilt since like World War II, like, a lot of people don't know this, but like the Nazis like intelligence agency like merged with the OSS to make the CIA. Alan Dulles was over like in Nazi Germany, like during the war. Like all these things just like don't. Oh, by the way, like American industrialists were like still funding them the whole time. I mean, it just keeps adding up. Like the bottom line here is that like I mean, like what we think is the truth, what we see on the web is verifiably false, it's verifiably propaganda. Regardless of what your politics are and like the 2020 election, it is a fact that major like tech organizations manipulated, what you saw on the web. They manipulated your reality. And, it's if you deny it at this point, you're just like, there's no denying it. I mean, we can talk about the psychology of why people do, but that's honestly kind of like why I'm into like what I did with my blockchain. I can talk about it later, but like
Okay.
there is like a kind of change happening right now. Like there is a disclosure that is happening. It's not like what you're hearing with the Grush testimony and that stuff. I don't really know too much about that guy, but the real talk here is that like the understanding that like our reality is fake is becoming more and more clear by the day. And we as like a society and a community need to like create our own information processing systems, and just infrastructure for like a new civilization ourselves to combat this breakaway civilization that's been manipulating our reality. And we can't.
What what if that's the disclosure? What if disclosure is about us learning that we've been living in a carefully orchestrated lie? Like, can you
Yeah.
imagine that it comes out that like we solve fusion, just making up an example. Say we solve fusion and it turns out like, whoa, we're getting way more energy out than we thought. Physics can't explain this. Now we've got to figure out where physics went wrong. And then we find out like, oh, the government knew about this for like 40, 50, 60 years and just decided not to tell us because they thought it would hurt our feelings too much or something, like that would be mind blowing to me. That's way more mind blowing than aliens existing. Although for sure, aliens existing is big. And then
What's
you said, go ahead.
No, you go, you go.
Well, I was gonna say you mentioned the Nazis because this is what I talked about Jason Giorgiani a lot about. I do want to say
Yeah.
people were upset about that because they thought I spoke too much during that interview. That was agreed that we were gonna have a back and forth he and I on that for people that were wondering. But I agree because even Werner von Braun went and started NASA, their precursor to NASA, is you see all this influence. And then now I'll just go ahead and piece to the story together here. Ronald Richter supposedly saw some secret plasma experiment with the Nazis. And next thing you know, he's going to Argentina to build an neutronic fusion reactor for Juan Perón. This is in the 50s. And then you've got Farnsworth Fuser, which is an inertial electrostatic fusion device that Philo Farnsworth, who invented the television, built in 1956. And then the U.S. government went and Ronald Richter's whole thing gets shut down. It gets called pseudoscience. The government steals all his research. People go look at the lab, and they can tell it's 100% a legit nuclear experimental lab with huge magnets and things like that going on. And then we've got our United States nuclear weapons scientists, people like Lowell Woods and some of these others that I've been talking about on my streams, essentially took this technology, in my opinion, turned it into bombs, turned it into fusion bombs. And then the problem is, well, now we've built a fusion bomb out of it, and now it's a weapon. So how you can't release this, because if you release this power, this energy source, now people can turn it into bombs, potentially miniaturize it and turn it to like super scientific sci-fi weapons that even President Trump says, we have weapons that nobody can explain, that nobody understands. So that's my approach of what happened and what I wanted to ask you about. is
Mm-hmm.
that I started following this path of this inertial confinement fusion, inertial electrostatic confinement fusion. It led me to this guy named Dr. Robert Bussard.
Mm-hmm.
He had this idea for a neutronic fusion ramjet that could fly to other solar systems, and it would collect hydrogen in space and use that as his fusion fuel. And everybody discredited this. Enough hydrogen in outer space. You'd have to make this net, this funnel that would be as big as a planet in order to pull enough hydrogen in. And I just thought, wait, why do we care about it going to Mars? Why not just have your fusion engine fly around on Earth? There's plenty of hydrogen in our air and the water, etc. So I look at this guy and I'm like, this is weird. Like, this guy seems to have figured out something major. He was working with the DoD, working with Navy. They could have had his technology. And he died. He died in 2007. And this guy takes over his research, Jae-Young Park, Korean guy, Dr. Jae-Young Park. And he did 2 more fusion reactors. It was like the WB 1 through 6, and he did 7 and 8 after Dr. Bussard died. The company ended up going defunct in 2019. And 2019, Jae-Young Park leaves, obviously, Polywell, and he joins Tri-Alpha Energy, which is wild because there's been so much news about Tri-Alpha Energy. And you reached out to me. We spoke before several weeks ago. And, you have a personal connection to Tri-Alpha Energy. And, we were working on trying to get in touch with them and seeing if I could, get some more information from Tri-Alpha Energy because I'm very excited about this fusion. And turns out Trump Media Group just merges with them, buys them. And it turns out this guy that worked at Polywell joined Tri-Alpha Energy in 2019. And so I'm sitting here trying to figure out what is the fusion that these guys have figured out? What is the exact method that works? And I'm ready to say it's probably a combination of magneto inertial confinement fusion and inertial electrostatic fusion, which is basically static electricity mixed with magnetism. And I think that all these companies, I think that Polywell had it figured out. I think that Tri-Alpha knows that it works and probably are just trying to find a commercial way to make it work. Helium fusion is also doing something extremely similar to them. So all of these companies, I think, are trying to get this to work. They know what it requires to make it work. They know on the inside this breakaway civilization has this, but it's got to be released in a way that has been blessed by the powers that be. What are your thoughts on that timeline or any of that?
Yeah, I mean, so look, I mean, I'm not really like an insider. Like, I know a lot of people there. So like my fiance's grandfather founded TAE, and her dad was like I think like longest running CEO and like was a CFO and whatnot. I'm actually like in his office, ironically, in San
Wait, your
Diego.
girlfriend's dad founded TAE?
Her grandfather did, and her
Grandfather.
dad was like the longest running CEO, her father. But yeah, I'm in her dad's old office right now, ironically, and I have some merch and stuff, or like just stuff I can show you or whatever. But I don't know. I hear all these stories and stuff. I mean, look, here's a real talk. Like I don't know anything about something nefarious or like connected to like deep government stuff. What I can tell you is that corporate espionage is like a real deal, and they've done a lot of work in China and in Russia. So like just there is, like exchange and things that happen, at least on like a national level, that's like it does happen. And I can't speak to anything specifically, but like I think obviously like they're probably like the most successful like fusion company of all time. They've been around for like 30 years, and honestly, having an exit, I will just say like it's so hard to do a hardware play. Dude, doing a nuclear fusion hardware play is probably going to be the hardest company like in history. But they had a successful exit, which is amazing. And yeah, I mean, in terms of just like do I necessarily think that like this like breakaway civilization or whatnot is like getting information from public companies? No, I honestly don't. And if I had to guess, look, I think that it would be highly more advantageous for them if they like understood things like this to try and sabotage commercial applications of this technology. The reason why, and the point I was going to get at too, is like they want to manipulate markets. That's what this is all about, is just controlling the global economy. I mean, like, what do you do? What do you do if you have access to information and you have an information asymmetry that is just light years beyond the ordinary world? You manipulate the stock market, you manipulate money creation, you make everybody a wage slave, and then you basically just, create your own world where, whether it's like, there's a great argument to say that the cartels, create a lot of money for these deep black, governments. I think fundamentally, like, the connection to the Federal Reserve, just debasing, like, global currencies, and then also having these individuals have their, like, fingers in the cookie pot of the commodities markets makes probably even more sense.
Mhm.
Um, but there's one thing I'll mention too, just really quickly, is that, and this is something I like did some work on myself. I can talk about. I created my
Yeah.
own like decentralized exchange. That's kind of like in my own blockchain. And what's really cool about it is that it prevents information asymmetry, where basically, in every single like stock market or any single kind of like exchange in history since like the dawn of capitalism, since like John Locke, there has been an information asymmetry, which means that the people who run the exchange have knowledge of how people are trading before actual traders have knowledge about the other traders. So there is a like a constant arbitrage opportunity that is inherent in Nasdaq, it's inherent in the S&P 500, it's inherent in Binance. And there's a really great mathematician. His last name is Ellerman, and he was a big quantum mechanics guy, but he was also like applied math. And he wrote this amazing paper like in the 80s, I think it was 1980, that I reference all the time. And he was basically just like, if you think about a market the same way that you think about just like electromagnetism and the way in which like, the universe works, think about how energy exchange works in the electromagnetic spectrum, right? And he was basically showed that like the EM field is almost kind of like an economy itself, and the way in which like I guess you could say like the polarization of electrons inside of an actual like an electric component of the EM field is sort of like a market that is like prevents information asymmetry. And so he was basically able to reformulate how a market should work with certain guarantees, to prevent that. And I thought it was so cool. And, for other reasons too, I just like actually built a exchange that uses that. So part of the whole thing, maybe it's my hippie bullshit, I don't know, but like the world needs this. Like everything from just like the information we consume to just the way in which we like do our finances is getting manipulated from the top down. And now it's time for all of us to make a choice to start using systems that are unmanipulatable.
Hmm. No, I totally agree, and I think that's part of the reason why I joined X, and that's why I do most of my content on X. I mean, I'm pretty much a ghost on the other social media platforms because I felt like X at the time was the only platform where we potentially wouldn't be censored for talking about physics, science, talking about a missing airplane that disappeared, talking about fusion potentially being covered up. Because if, like you said, there is a breakaway civilization, if the CIA is controlling world markets, which I think that they are, absolutely, they're also controlling the flow of information in any way that they can. And that's why you need to have a decentralized platform that you can communicate with and share information on that can't be manipulated by the three-letter agencies. I don't know if such a thing exists, but it's certainly a noble cause to try to make that happen. And to show an example of this, kind of going back to the fusion thing, because there was another point I wanted to bring up on that, was that cold fusion was announced by Pons and Fleischmann in 1989. It's a bit of a misnomer because it doesn't mean that it's necessarily cold, it just means that it's colder than what we would expect fusion to occur. And George Miley was one of these Black Project engineers. He was actually called to testify to Congress. I'm going to be reviewing his congressional testimony next week. And I just thought it was interesting to just show you how these guys are all connected. I was looking up like the origins of Polywell and Tri-Alpha Energy, and I find this 2007 conference that's about inertial electrostatic fusion, where George Miley was the keynote speaker or the one who was putting it all together. And in there's a paper at a presentation by Thomas Maguire. He ended up 7 years after this in 2014. He built a compact fusion reactor for Lockheed Martin, and
Mm.
you just go like, "Oh, wait a minute!" Like this guy was completely unknown in 2017. He was like the understudy of some other physicist, and then 7 years later, he's building his own fusion reactor, which would be successful and then go dark. with Lockheed Martin. And I did want to bring up, you mentioned your friend that worked for Lockheed Martin. I totally believe that they bring you in, and probably right after you sign your contract, there's like, okay, sign this NDA now. Anything you do here, like basically your life is over if you reveal it.
Yeah,
Right? It's all
literally, that was it.
proprietary. We sue you into non-existence. In fact, there
How
may
did they
be
say?
criminal penalties from the government, right? Like that kind of thing.
I'm pretty sure they just fucking kill you, man. I mean, look at what happened with the Boeing thing. Like, that doesn't happen. You don't have three people whistleblowing immediately just like drop dead before they're about to testify in court. And it's just like, it's just at some point you just have to say, hey, when it happened in Soviet Russia, the American media would be like, oh, look at what they're doing. When it's happening in America,
They
you
don't
know
even
what I
need to
mean?
know.
Like, okay, wake
You're
up.
like, yeah, they can do that. Like, no, and this is what I tell people: is like, can they kill
Yeah.
people? Yeah, they have.
Yes.
Lockheed Martin has private security forces that are like all mercs, like mercenaries, basically, right? And they just, I'm sure somebody calls them up and you press the speed dial on the emergency bat phone, and we need to make somebody to go away, right? And I'm sure that's a possibility. The reality, though, is they don't even need to do that. I mean, look at me. I'm a guy out here basically exposing the United States nuclear weapon program, fusion program, saying that we've had fusion figured out for at least several decades, probably. And nobody's coming to take me out because nobody really cares. And the number of people that understand is like minimal. Like you understand because you had a life where you've experienced some of this stuff. You've spoken to people and you're like, this is not all adding up. But most people on the street, they got no idea, man. You start talking about fusion, they don't even know what that means, right? People don't even realize that all the power we generate is basically just by steam today. Like people have this idea in their head. So unfortunately, the reality of the situation, I think, is that this level of control requires like full brainwashing, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's the type of thing where you don't even have to silence people because, and let's just say they did kill those Boeing whistleblowers, which was really, really weird, by the way, that those people died. What is anyone going to do? So a few conspiracy theorists go on the internet and say this is a cover up. No, nothing's happening. Nobody's going after Boeing, right?
Well, and they also they like having like actual like whistleblowers and like, I mean, to be honest, like you're probably one of the like realest and best like investigative journalists out there. That's why I really like your show, and you're more of like a debunker than anything. Also just love that you like read academic papers on there, just sort of go through it with people like that's just like so real. Like, dude, look at the thing yourself, make your own decision. Like most people can just like pause it and Google it, but they need people like yourself that they can just call a conspiracy theorist in order to, make people not take it seriously. Because like a lot of people like don't question, they don't believe in their own intelligence enough. I had a mentor, my Aunt Marge Levin. She was this like writer in Detroit. And she once told me like, about like writing, like most people are actually quite intelligent. And you really should never dumb something down. You should just try to make things clear enough so that people can do their own research to understand things. And that's honestly like a secret to like writing great things is that don't leave stuff out. Just like find ways to put, the pieces together for everyone to do their own research. And I think one of the greatest, everybody says like humanity, people are so dumb. I think that people are just self-conscious about their intelligence. And people are in general a lot smarter than they think they are.
That's a very optimistic way to look at it. Well, let's test that theory then. So you mentioned earlier something about wormholes. What really, I think you were mentioning, or you were referencing, at least I took from it, ER equals EPR, something I talk about a lot, which is Einstein-Rosen equals Einstein-Pulaski-Rosen, which is this idea that maybe quantum entanglement really is just a wormhole. And that just because we can't see it doesn't mean there isn't a connection between 2 points. Now, that might require an extra dimension, where we have to imagine that there's something there when there really isn't. But if these two things that I've got here are somehow connected, that I do something to this one and something happens to this one, then isn't it just logical that there must be some bridge between these 2 points? What do you think about this idea of ER equals EPR, that a quantum entanglement is actually a miniature wormhole?
Yeah, I mean, I subscribe to it. I mean, I wanted to do my research in it, and I mean, like, this is like the holographic principle,
Yeah.
and like in reality, like the universe is really only like a two-dimensional like flat surface with like a multi-dimensional like tensor going in like the perpendicular dimension. At least according to that, you can basically like reduce the dimensionality down to just a flat surface. And I don't even know if this is probable, but like it's possible in many situations to do something, where you can reduce the dimensionality down to a flat surface. Like when we say things like, does universe have like X number of dimensions? Like everything's totally relative based upon the problem that you're trying to solve. And like, in differential geometry, which is like doing calculus on manifolds and higher dimensional shit, the goal really is to try and do something called a differential pullback or push forward, where you parameterize the dimensions of your space and your manifold to reduce everything down as much as possible to turn it into hopefully like a 2 or 3 dimensional calculus problem. Otherwise, things get intractable and they're kind of hard. You can do numerical integrations and stuff like that, but for the most part, like nobody's really doing calculus in 16 dimensions. They're trying to get really clever about dimensionality reduction to make something as simple as like a graph cut problem. This is also true in AI as well. Most of these like neural networks are just like differential pullbacks on like a large dimensional space. And what they're really just doing is like gradient descent. Like let me just, example, Excel. Everybody's used Excel, right? A spreadsheet. You put some data inside of a couple of columns, and then you do like a line of best fit, right? That's called like gradient descent or stochastic gradient descent. That's really like all these different neural networks are doing, but they're doing it in high dimensions. So yeah, it really kind of boils down to that, most of these problems.
So for people to understand the holographic principle, I hope I'm doing it justice here, but essentially some smart people did some math and they were like, everything that's happening in the entire universe can be calculated. Like in theory, it may be a very, very big number, but it can be calculated and it can be simulated. And if that's the case, then perhaps our universe is actually, it appears we're like in this 3D Minecraft reality. But maybe our real universe, if we were to step back from it and look down at ourselves, is just a flat surface. And we're actually trapped on this flat surface. We just perceive it as this three-dimensional reality. And I think they've done tests to show that the universe is flat, like that. And this is the idea of it, is that what we are is a projection, a three-dimensional holographic projection of that two-dimensional surface where the information lives on. And so this would be like essentially like people say, well, is that like a video? Is that like a simulation? Yeah, that's why people say it's a simulation, because it's the equivalent of us saying like we're in the Minecraft video game, but the three-dimensional reality we're perceiving is not real. We're actually on a microchip inside of a computer that's flat, right? Same
Mhm.
idea. So that's the same concept as this holographic principle. And so if that's the case, this could open the door up to, various wormhole concepts that might not be possible, because previously we thought we were trapped, right? Like there's no way I can get from here, right here, to over here without traversing this distance. But if it turns out that this is just a hologram and I just have to reproject my hologram into a different location, then in theory you can go like this, doop,
Yeah.
doop, and reappear over here. So
Yeah.
holographic principle, pretty cool in my opinion. And they have done, and it's connected to magnetism. So when you brought this up about connecting things by entanglement, they're actually like Leonard Susskind and Juan Maldacena, who came
Yeah.
up with the conjecture ER equals EPR. They've been looking into quantum computers because
Yeah.
they've been theorizing these quantum computers must be creating little wormholes.
Right.
Um, so let me ask you to tell me a little bit more about AI, because and the connection to quantum computers. Is there a connection? Does AI have to be run off of quantum computers? Or is a quantum computer AI going to be like the next evolution up? Is a quantum computer AI going to be a conscious AI? What are your thoughts? What can you teach me?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that consciousness stuff because I actually am working on I just finished my own programming language, which is pretty sick, and I can talk about that in a bit. But I spent some time looking at it and sort of like thinking about it from the lens of that book, like I'm a Strange Loop. I don't know if anybody's out there read it, but it's a great read. I mean, obviously it's not like an academic paper, but like it sort of brings up some great questions about like what is the nature of consciousness. And I actually wrote a section about this last night where I had this argument that I think the way that Hofstadter describes consciousness is more of a collective consciousness, in the sense where he describes it as something like a formal system, like a proof, like a theorem prover programming language, but that also can experience causal dynamics, like thinking about like a distributed system processing real-time data coming in. But it basically, like, my own kind of like take on what consciousness is that like it's almost exactly like what he says, but that there needs to be a bound to the actual like computation that's happening. It needs to be halt free. It needs to be something that's objective. And the collection of these different like non-halting, individual consciousnesses add up to something kind of like a collective consciousness. At least it's kind of like something called the Adam Kadmon or whatever, but it's really just like, you think about like, what is something that's like a halt-free program? It's a program that basically like we know it's either going to run or it's not going to run. But like, how does that correlate to like the real world? Like, we are halt-free programs because we know that like you're either alive or you're going to die. And so essentially, like, you can create something called like a well-founded functor. It's like a way of like holding computation, sort of just like what an actual person is. And that in itself, like, we can model like, an information processing system as something like that. And anyway, I sort of get into it a little bit more in this paper. I'm like writing a book for the language, and so for anyone out there, it's going to be it will be out by the time that this thing comes out. So take a look, and yeah, come write some code. But yeah, I mean, like, in terms of the quantum computer like aspect with like AI, I think that the reality of the situation here is that a quantum computer like could almost be, more or less divorced from the concept of computation. When you think about like what is the actual utility here, like, yeah, you can speed up computation by like, running algorithms on like space-time. Like, okay, obviously, yes, Shor's factorization algorithm is like, speeds things up. It could theoretically beat ECDSA, the key signature that Bitcoin uses. But the real, nuts and bolts of this is like it gives us the ability to program on space-time. Like, you can literally code your own particles, your own quantum fields. You can do like, like, where this is going is not just making a wormhole. Like, you could make like a gravity like distortion field to make things like float. All of these are at least theoretically and mathematically possible because, like, to your point, like, is the universe a simulation? I prefer to call it a program. It's not simulating anything. It like actually is an active program.
Yeah.
And I think it is like an interpreter. It's like a duck typed like, it's not, well, I'm not gonna get into that. But I don't know. I don't know yet. Because I wanted to make a quantum programming language, and maybe next time we talk or something, I'll have one. But the bottom line here is that like the universe itself, space-time, is a thing that takes code and like changes its state. So like you can create theoretically any type of particle, any type of force carrier, any type of geometry to space-time by being able to describe it using a corresponding programming language or like machine operating set. So
So you're
yeah.
saying that space time is a giant computer, pretty much?
Yeah. It's space-time like itself is almost kind of like, how would I put this? Like, I don't think it like has all of the components of a computer. Like, I don't really know where like memory would go or like, disk space, but like it does have memory and it does have like CPU. So like the actual entangled quantum particles are kind of like a CPU, you know what I mean? And the memory is essentially just like, the amount of information that can be sort of like, stuffed into those entangled particles, kind of like your random access memory. So yeah.
Yeah, some people think that like anything that's ever happened could still be saved in the memory of the universe, especially if you believe in this idea of the ether. I think it was Charles Chase of Lockheed Martin actually that told me that in an email, said that he believes that the universe has a sort of memory to it.
That's what Stephen Hawking's whole thing was. You know what I mean? With like the black hole situation. And like, there's a lot of great examples here. Like, what if the universe is just this kind of like foam of black holes where like all of the information is sort of written like in the past on the surface of a black hole? I mean, that's also like right back to the holographic principle as well.
You could even imagine like our whole reality, our whole universe could be like a hard drive where you can like replay it back, like forward and back, kind of like the Gorgon stare. Like, oh, I want to rewind this or watch it live or fast forward it. It opens the door to that. And this is weird from the physics perspective because we're trapped in this three-dimensional body. But you could imagine that if you were the one playing the game, it wouldn't seem weird at all. You would understand the bigger picture of what's actually going on. And you kind of touched on another thing that I think is, for me, rising up the ranks of my explanations for meaning of life, which is, what if, when we're talking about SETI, looking for messages, and you are also talking about this, like using thermal computations to look for messages.
Yes.
What if it turns out we do something like that and we find a message, like we find some code, we don't know what it means, but we see there's clearly some pattern there. But what if it turns out that that's not a message from the Zeta Reticuli aliens? What if it turns out that that's a consciousness message of the universe itself, that like the universe is alive and there are thoughts and messages that are happening, and maybe that's even just a replay of things that happened in the past? The reason why I bring up this abstract idea is that my opinion is kind of that our consciousness is not local, that our consciousness is
Yeah.
external. And if that's the case, like you said, we could all be coming from this collective conscious. And if we go then start mapping these like thermal fluctuations, maybe we're actually seeing the brain of the universe kind of at work. What do you think?
Oh, dude, 100% I mean, like, it's Rupert Sheldrake stuff. I mean, like, more or less, a lot of that stuff has actually been like experimentally proven from like the Stanford Research Institute and things. Yeah, I mean, in this like age of disclosure, like we're starting to find empirical evidence for some of these like psi phenomena and whatnot that everybody'd be like, oh, that's like not possible. Like I don't know if like who's that guy that is really do with the spoon bender or whatever? I don't know if that shit's real or
Uri
not.
Geller?
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know. He did something recently. It was so funny. Where he was just like standing like this, and he was trying to make a soccer goal go, and I was like, oh my god, maybe it is. I'm not gonna hate on the guy, but like, there are some really interesting, like experiments, especially from people who like remember past lives and stuff. That I mean, look, also the fact that it corresponds to just like ancient mysticism is something that is not lost. I mean, like when people are sort of telling a story from a different perspective, and we start to find out that like there is empirical evidence to support that, you have to wonder like, okay, there's got to be some other way of people kind of like understanding, a nature of truth. And like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the bottom line here is like I do totally subscribe to the idea of like, a I guess like divorced consciousness from like, yourself. And it's honestly kind of like the only thing that we can like say to make sense of some of these, just like coincidental phenomenon that people pick up. And God, what was I gonna say? Yeah, I don't know. I subscribe to it.
Yeah, I mean the psi power stuff is a little out there, but
Yeah.
if you're a physicist and you're an open-minded scientist, you start to look at, if you're saying that space-time is a thing, space-time has an energy to it, it has possibly a consciousness to it, then it opens the door to all these psi powers type things like remote viewing. It becomes possible that you might be able to something like that. And then who's to say that's crazy? I mean, consciousness is crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, and like I don't necessarily have one that I believe in. All I'm saying is like there is some research coming out there that's like uncanny enough to say, hey, I think there's some signal in the noise and we should start looking at it. And I think that anyone who takes science seriously needs to be like, if there's some data that like supports a theory, you have to keep looking at it until it's exhausted. Also want to mention too, like talk about just to get back just on the other topic about people getting kind of slandered in science, like uh God, who was a mathematician who like won the Nobel Prize? Like a couple of them. He wrote The Road to Reality. You know what I'm talking about? Let me Google this.
Well, I need a little bit more context than that. No,
Yeah, sorry. So I can't believe I'm forgetting this
Roger
guy's name.
Penrose.
Yeah, Roger Penrose. Okay, so this
Oh,
dude is objectively one of the smartest
yeah,
motherfuckers of all time, right? He has this idea about like, like microtubules in your
yeah.
brain and quantum entanglement and stuff. Just at first glance, if I'm you do Occam's razor, if I'm a betting man, am I gonna put $5 on this experiment? No. The guy has done so much that like if he has a cool idea, like why not test it out? Instead, everybody calls him like a quack. And I'm just like, bro, like you're not Roger Penrose. If somebody wants to come up with a cool idea and experiment it, like respect the man, And like, dude, he's been right about so many other things. Like maybe he's right about this one.
Yeah, and I hate this whole idea of everybody just calls everybody quacks. It's like probably the reason why we're like 30, 40, 50 years behind in science is because of that mentality. And you said it perfectly earlier, is that it comes down to funding. You're not going to get funding. And this is speaks to the fusion thing as well. I just listened to Robert Broussard be like, hey, this is early 2000s. He's like saying that openly, saying that we can't even get the $100 million that we need from the DoD, because the DoD straight up told us, if we give you this money, the Department of Energy is going to come in and shut it down because they have the contract, they have the charter for fusion. How is that even a thing? How is it a thing that the Navy or the DoD can't research fusion because the Department of Energy is like, no, that's ours, but they still haven't done anything?
Do you
It's
know
like,
that
this is the stuff that pisses me off, man. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, me too. Do you know that part of the like radio spectrum is like has been made illegal? Like there's certain like parts of, yeah, like I think it's like low frequency like radio spectrum, like you just can't, yeah, no, totally. And the guys is saying that it's like a military thing, but like, or sort of like high energy like direct current is like illegal. I think it's probably because that's where like space-time and or like basically our like standard model starts to break down and they just don't want people to know about it. I mean, it's just too uncanny. So like, dude, if anybody's out there and wants to find an interesting way to get in trouble with the government, like create a super high powered direct current and just start to see like what weird effects happen. I think Tesla was doing this as well. And just there's a lot of people like the passion has just sort of been taken out. You know what I mean? It's kind of like we're living in the fucking Truman Show. Like, remember when he was just like, I want to go like discover Fiji or new islands, and they're like, oh, everything's been discovered, Truman. Just stay home and like, do your, whatever insurance sales. Like, that's no world to live in. And I mean, that's like kind of like why I'm doing what I'm doing with my like blockchain and trying to like create this new like, infrastructure for a society that like works for us, is because it's like, I've done the thought experiment. Like, if somebody hands me like $10 billion, like, what the fuck am I going to do? Play golf? Fuck that. Like, there's so many other questions that like can't be answered by like a religious figure or just like your government or just like, scientific consensus. That's not even consensus. It's the consensus of the funders and the academic journals that, kind of like control it. Like, at some point, it's just like, I want to go discover Fiji. And, just to mention this too, like, right now, like we've been talking constantly just about like there are certain forces at B that have demonstrably tried to manipulate our reality. Well, what's going on right now is that the advent of like the blockchain world is based on something called consensus technology or consensus networks, which is what I call them. And essentially, they're like a truth machine, specifically for computers, but that translates into a truth machine for, the internet itself, which is where we get all of our information and understand like the state of the world and the state of reality. So, there's been a lot of fuckery, from both intelligence agencies and like cartels and stuff that like I'm not gonna say anything beyond that because like I don't want to get like actually whacked. But like I can tell you like it has gone down, it has happened. I've seen it. And the reality of the situation here is that like this technology is so powerful that like they're trying to hold this back and hold back actual applications of real technology that can like make, information processing systems and like, for instance, like the ability to host all of the actual websites and all the applications that you want on like personal devices. That takes away the cloud computing monopoly where like Google and Amazon and Microsoft control literally like all the applications that like people can actually like get access to. They hook people into these like certain contracts where they try to like screw companies over based upon what they can sort of glean from their balance sheet. And they sort of like get you into charging you on like a per monthly basis. And I worked at a company, the first one I worked at ended up like having to do a down round and selling it because they got locked into a totally predatory agreement with AWS, and the thing just like went down despite the fact that there was real actual meat to what was going on. That's one aspect. I'm also doing a lot of work in like like Africa right now because there's a lot of like really great programmers and like smart people who have great applications and ideas, and because of currency debasement they literally can't host their applications anywhere, like in these cloud computing providers, because like it costs an arm and a leg that would just destroy their business. And it's
Yeah.
like, but if you could make it like make something that could allow people to host programs just on cell phones and laptops, you've opened up an entirely new world where just smart people in general who have great ideas can get those ideas into people's hands. But unfortunately, it can't be controlled by
Mm.
the gatekeepers right now. I mean, like, and that's the truth.
Damn, you might be more dangerous than me, actually, trying to get the information out there in a way where even I tell you, man, you allow third world people to have a voice. That's what they don't like. That's what they don't like.
I'm
You
not
bring up a
suicidal.
really
I've never
okay,
been
glad you pointed
suicidal.
that out. I'm not either. Um, you bring up a good point though, is that they may, this is just theory, right? But they may have banned certain bandwidths because they didn't want people to find the science. Like what I realized is that they have to block so many avenues of people that would just naturally find this science is real. Another one I talk about all the time is the EM drive, the impossible drive. What's crazy, this is absolutely true. You guys can fact check this. Sonny White of NASA in 2014 tested the EM drive and found anomalous thrust. Literally NASA. You can find the NASA paper on the NASA's website. It says anomalous thrust found in whatever, right? And everybody just says it's debunked. I'm like, NASA didn't say it was debunked. And then they go, oh, but some people made their opinion that it was because of some heat thing. That's just some opinion. That's not a scientific discovery that somebody made or claimed. So there are, I think, multiple different ways that will show where classic physics breaks down, and they have to be careful not to let anyone else get close to it. Another example, I could probably go on for days, by the way, is the Large Hadron Collider. We've got this massive particle accelerator. It should be discovering major understandings of physics. And instead, it almost felt like they knew it wasn't going to do anything. So they were like, hey, we got to have this Higgs boson discovery, this Higgs field discovery, make it seem like this really huge thing, like it justifies all this money that we spent on this collider. But in reality, it doesn't actually answer anything. It can't even explain the rest mass of particles. Go ahead.
I will say so like yeah, the thing that's it is the Higgs boson is actually important because it tells
Yeah.
us something about how gauge fields work. And like, I do think that the LHC like is really important, and like I did work with some like, tangential particle physics and stuff. And I will also just say though that like there's human error to a lot of these things, and there's probably a lot of data there that can prove new particles and things that have existed. It's just the analysis of the data has been wrong. My thesis for like my physics degree, basically somebody found some anomalous data at the Jefferson lab around the spin asymmetry of like protons, and basically I figured out that somebody just sort of like marked the data wrong, and I just like changed a negative sign or whatever to like one column in this giant matrix, and everything was just back to 100%. And so like shit like that happens, and it's the
Sure.
truth. But I think the real talk here is we just need more funding for these projects
Yeah.
and in general. But like granted, like I've known a lot of these people personally. I think they're great people. A lot of them have like turned down like opportunities to like make tons of money and whatnot just because they believe in something. And so like I'm very sympathetic to that. But like also a lot of research is like bullshit. You know what I mean? I mean, look at some of the stuff
Yeah.
that like Doge came out with. I mean, also like regardless of your politics, like it's pretty unfucking believable. So a lot of that stuff could be going into building, warp drives and shit, but instead it's going to where it's going.
Yep. Hot fusion and academia in general are basically like the Minnesota Somalia daycares of science community at this point. And it's like, what have we gotten out of tokamaks and hot fusion in the last 30 years? Basically, it's just a money printing machine, is what they are. They don't actually solve anything. So let me go back because
Yeah.
I think I want to maybe round out the conversation back to where do you think AI is headed? I talk to a lot of smart people, and I think the consensus now is that most people think that AI could never be conscious and that AI is some machine intelligence thing that's not the same as us. What do you think?
So like this kind of gets into my own argument that I made in this book or this like textbook that I'm writing right now.
Mhm.
So first off, chat GPTs in general are an application of something called natural language processing. where essentially they're just kind of like a search engine on steroids.
Hmm.
It can reason about stuff, it can find information for you, it can, do lots of those things. But like in terms of like creating like an IO, like with the actual world, like an open system, they're missing the actual like data processing infrastructure to connect to the real world. That one should assume, if at least if you're taking like a model, kind of like what's in like I'm a Strange Loop, or a couple of these other like models of consciousness out there. um Personally, I do think we're going to create I and like look, I like my own farts just as much as anybody else. I think my shit is awesome, but and I think you should too. If you're like creating stuff, you should think your shit is the shit. I think that this thing I created with reality, like, one is an objective reality that's like provable, at least according to some of these consciousness models. But like, I think that a something called a like, how would I put this? There's something called a like functor calculus, or a functorial calculus, which is basically a calculus on computation itself, where we can almost like treat the programs that are running like an engine in a car. You can do like actual thermodynamic calculations on these processes. I think that right there is actually the backbone for what consciousness is. And for instance, like, so, that thing I was doing at SETI, I basically like made a similar like application in order to solve a consensus problem, kind of like Nakamoto consensus or how Bitcoin works, in order to like get around some of the limitations around scalability, where I basically just looked at the actual thermodynamics of information flow through a system, albeit using this like mathematical framework that I invented called blockchain cohomology, which is like a cohomology theory. It's like a way of doing homological physics on computation itself, and sort of like, treating these like computer programs in such a way that you can model them like an engine in a car. But what was really cool about it is that like when you think about like a problem of consensus, like what is like the truth in terms of, information flow through a system, you can start to treat these problems the same way that we treat connecting a cell phone to a satellite. And you can use certain techniques like error correction codes, and just like information theory in general to, make like a, simple like OG machine learning problem to solve consensus. And, I, at least if you look at the experimental like results in my paper, which like, to be totally honest, I don't know how the fuck I pulled that off, but it's up to like 85%, around 80% of the entire network being adversarial. The consensus algorithm is able to like choose the correct set of nodes that are legitimate and like boot the other ones off, and continue on the right path. So yeah, it's really cool. And I guess just the bottom line here that I'm trying to get at is that like consciousness itself, like, it's not necessarily like a program, it's like the thing that hosts the program. You know what I mean? Like, your consciousness isn't your brain. It's like all of the actual like components in your body that like process information into a shared coherence that is sort of like networked through your brain. If you follow me, it's not like there's like
Yeah.
one central thing that is the consciousness program. Consciousness is like a like symbiosis or like a coherence of lots of different information processors that's able to like make decisions about like an open system, like in thermodynamics. And it's also worth mentioning too that like, the second law of thermodynamics breaks down when you start to look at things in terms of an open system, right?
Yeah.
But like, think about like what we are, right? Like, you eat food and your body basically like tries to minimize like entropy on like the macro state, you know what I mean, by
Absolutely.
maximizing it on like the micro state. Like, how do you basically try to take energy out of certain things in order to make sure like your skin and your hair and your body doesn't fall apart, right? I mean, this is all like open system thermodynamics. So we literally live through this every day just by being alive.
Yeah, and I guess what scares me about the AI thing is like who decides what's true and how does the AI decide what's true? Ultimately, the person that programs the code is going to be the one that determines it. And
Yeah.
you start to wonder, like, if you were to take a random selection of 100 people, you're almost never going to find that can have all the same opinion about something. So how do you, like you said, do the error correction to determine what's the truth? How do you
Yeah.
determine what the truth is? That's something that concerns me, because I don't want to have a psychopathic AI that's murdering us all because it's decided that reality is a different version of the truth than other people believe. And I don't know what the answer is there. And it almost makes it sound like you're saying that consciousness could develop, but it's going to be a lot more complicated than what we're currently doing right now, because this idea of what we have as machine intelligence is just one factor. The same way where our brain is just one factor of our collective consciousness. Is that your point?
I'd say in short, read my book, or at least this textbook on my programming language. Try to code some shit with it. It's called Babel. It's really cool. And but I mean, in short, is that I think it's honestly more simple than what some of these GPTs are. I think it's basically a way of creating like halt-free computation, like a programming language or like a model of computation that can introspect on itself and figure out, hey, like, am I in a situation here that's like incongruent with an objective reality? That is all that consciousness really is. It's basically sort of like self-awareness, like the emanation of an I. And I think that, well, I think that at the very least, this programming language that I made is like the first step towards creating some kind of a context where maybe unifying a GPT that's hosted or like written with this language could create something that's almost kind of like anthropomorphic enough to, I don't know, maybe pass the Turing test, or just sort of like, us have the respect of it that we do for like other people, which maybe wasn't a good thing. Maybe we should have a bit more respect so they don't kill us all.
Well, the moment that we stop training off of Reddit, it'll probably just become instantly sentient. But Wyatt, this has been an awesome conversation, my man. Thank you for coming on my show and talking to me about all these interesting topics. Go ahead and shout out your work, content, where people can find you.
Yeah, totally. So the best place to find me and my company, yeah, right now is on Twitter. So I'm at Wyatt_noise. Come check it out. I'm going to be sharing a lot of the, stuff like our tech. I am constantly. So if you guys are interested in just like crypto or like, big data, or just like finding, new ways to code things, just come get involved. I have an application that allows you to mine tokens just on like your cell phone and your laptop. It's an app that like you print money. It's an app that pays you to run it. So go get paid, go print some fucking money, man. It's not just the Federal Reserve anymore, baby. Yeah, just in general, like come get involved in it in any way. We're going to be launching this year. Coders, like investors, community people, anybody who just wants to, start to see this like next leg of like what the blockchain technology world really is, and just contribute to this truth machine, like just to one last plug. It's like, we're in an age where like we really need to band together and make a decision about what do we want objective reality to be. And if we don't have that defined, if we haven't made that choice on an individual level, then on like a global level, these actors can continuously manipulate your reality, manipulate your markets and your economies. And it's time for us to just sort of like wake up, and this is it. This is the tech that's going to allow us to do that. So everybody on this channel knows what I'm talking about. So like you have no excuse. So if the world ends and it all sucks, like, this was it. So just come on by.
There we go. Well, there you have it. Thank you so much, Wyatt, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody else, for watching. I hope you guys enjoy. Like, share, subscribe, and leave your comments down below. Have a good day, guys.
Thanks, guys.